Hey everybody, welcome back to Winamac Hockey. Today we are giving our free agency grades for the Metro Division. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing for more NHL content like this. All right, fellas, let's break down each team in the Metro and talk about the free agency grades that we gave them, starting with the Carolina Hurricanes, who added Burns and Pacioretty most notably. And they lost a significant amount of players here, headlined by Trocheck, Domi, and Nino Niederreiter. So, guys, Jake, you and I gave a C minus. Matt, you gave him a B minus here. Jake, let's talk about some of your thoughts.
All right, so they lost a big D pair in Ian Cole and Tony DeAngelo. They did bring in Brent Burns, and he can still produce offensively. I think he's a little weak on the defensive side, which is, the primary goal of a defender. But maybe in the Rod the Bod Brindamore system, Burns can turn it around and be the elite defender that they're hoping for. But they also lost Trocheck, who I think was a great center for them. I don't know why they would let him go. But yeah, that's sort of why their grade went down for me, is I think they lost those three big pieces.
All right, and Matt, let's come over to you. You gave him a letter grade better here. What did you like about Carolina's offseason?
Well, I think the thing I liked about it most is that they decided to keep with their scheme of having a good offensive defenseman that can line up with their good defensive scheme. And I like Brent Burns. I think he's a player who doesn't have a lot left in the tank, but I'm sure he's got enough for another season or two. And the fact that they didn't have to take on his full contract was also big too. So they were able to get a little bit of that retained was a big thing for me. And even the Pacioretty bringing him in, I mean, he's going to give them something. I mean, even if it's like not like full Pacioretty from Montreal days, he's still going to be a guy who's probably going to play at least top 9 minutes, top 6 minutes. He's going to be a good contributor for that team. And as much as they're getting a little bit older, I think maybe that's a good thing because a lot of the time they've been relying on players who haven't been able to contribute for them offensively. We know for a fact Pacioretty's an offensive guy and Brent Burns an offensive guy, which is something lacked severely last year. It's something they'll be getting more of this season.
Yeah, getting Pacioretty for nothing, definitely a good move on their part. The one thing that I guess the reason I gave him a C minus here was C is staying the same. And I don't know if they necessarily got better. I think losing Trocheck for me was the biggest thing here, and losing D'Angelo. And I just feel like D'Angelo was a good fit for them, and so replacing him with Burns is a question mark for me. But I could see that really being a good move for them potentially. It's all a matter of how well he fits. So that's why I gave him a C minus there. But fellas, let's move on to our next team here, and that is the Columbus Blue Jackets, who added Johnny Hockey to their roster, and they really didn't lose anything here. I gave him an A, Jake an A minus, and Matt, you gave him a B here. Jake, let's come over to you. What did you like about Columbus?
All right, so I think for a team that really didn't have a lot to lose, they had a good offseason. They did re-sign Line A. I would have liked more for the term, but then adding Johnny Gaudreau is huge. The only thing they could have done to improve this offseason for me is to acquire a center or maybe a couple more depth defenders. They did add Gudbranson, who's going to add some grit to the lineup and hopefully protect some of their young guys. But I think sort of right now they're sort of in that development phase. They want their young guys to get better, and they've got Gaudreau for 8 years, so they have time for their young centers to develop into his future playmaker.
Yeah, and Matt, what do you think of Columbus's offseason overall?
I mean, it really was uneventful until that signing of Gaudreau. So he kind of jump started, gave him the shot in the arm that they needed for this offseason. Otherwise, it would have probably been just a normal, boring offseason for them of shipping a couple out and getting a couple in. But yeah, he was a huge signing for them. Definitely something they needed. Like Jake said, I think center was probably the more bigger need. So it was kind of weird. But at the same time, you see a guy like Gaudreau, especially a guy who's willing to sign for you, you're going to make him sign. So, I mean, he's a guy that I think is going to add a lot to this lineup. A team that has been wavering a little bit in the last couple of years. They've had a lot of really good talent come in and then out of the door immediately. So it's nice to finally get a guy on a really long-term deal that they can just say, this is our guy. This is who's going to lead us going forward, and they don't have to worry about him walking away.
And a guy like Johnny Hockey, I mean, that's no joke. He's going to take that team to the next level, potentially a playoff spot. I don't know. I mean, it's really competitive in the East, but man, is that the boost that they need. All right, fellas. So talking about another team that's been on the brink of breaking out here, the New Jersey Devils. They went out and added some key pieces here. They got Vanacek, Aula, and Palat, most notably, and they lost Zaka and Subban. So they didn't really lose too much here compared to what they gained. Jake, you and I gave him an A. Matt, you gave him a B. Jake, what did you like about New Jersey's offseason?
So I really like the Palat signing. That's the big thing for me. And I mean, also getting rid of that Subban contract is huge. But yeah, Palat is going to be a great forward for their depth. They've already got some good prospects because they have been blessed more than anyone in the draft lottery. So I think they just got some of the pieces that they need. The only thing I don't like is the Vanacek edition. Now, I liked Vanacek in Washington. He plays hard. But as far as raw skill goes, sorry if you're watching this for some reason, Vanacek, but he's not the most gifted goalie in the world. And I think that he's a good regular season guy. He can win you games, but when it comes to the playoffs and teams sort of figure out your defense and they start getting through more, Vanacek's not your guy.
Yeah, and Matt, what do you think about Jake's thoughts here? And then how come you gave him a B? I know that you liked a lot of what they did, but what did you not like as well?
I was kind of the same thing with the Vanacek thing. I mean, it kind of showed, even though I know Jake will attest to this, that maybe in the long run it would have been better. The Vanacek would have been the starter later in the season. The bottom of the line is that he did get benched for Samsonov there in Washington. So it did show that they were willing to go another direction and they were willing to kind of set him aside, which kind of showed you everything you needed to know with the guy. So I think maybe a change of scenery is different for him, but at the same point, this defense, as young and as talented as it is, it's still a defense that's in development and not a lot of good defensive defensemen in front of him. So it's going to be a trying year for him trying to do a lot of the work there in net. It's going to be interesting to see. That was the real issue I had there. But the Palat signing, I did like. I thought it was something they need more veterans in this team. That's just the bottom line of it. They have a lot of young guys in the starting lineup. They needed some like veteran infusion, especially Stanley Cup winning veteran infusion into this lineup, and that's something they got with Palat.
Yeah, same here, fellas. I really enjoyed the Palat signing here, and that just gave them that huge step that I think that they needed.
Real quick, what Matt's too nervous to say here is that he actually gave them a B because he's a big PK Subban fan. And he's like, you know what? Letting them go is a mistake. When he wins the Norris next year, you'll all see.
All right, fellas. Next up, we have the New York Islanders, who made a significant addition on draft day, actually, by acquiring Romanov from Montreal. And honestly, that was a great move for them because you see that they lost Green and Chara, two defensemen. So they got another young guy in here. But Jake, you and I gave him an F. Matt, you gave him a B minus. So there's a little bit of discrepancy here. So Jake, why did you not like the Islanders offseason thus far?
The moves they made were basically just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. The team is sinking regardless. And I don't like what they did. I don't understand the direction of the team. I think that Lou thinks that they're still a contender. They're going the wrong direction, bud. So I think that part of it is also the style of the team is not great. Bartel is done with the team, I think, at this point. He's just kind of bored with their style. That man should be a 100 point scorer, and he's not because they run a defensive system, and the team is built for a defensive system. So no matter what coach you bring in, it's not going to help him because the team's not built that way. So I just think that the moves, like Romanov's a good player, but it's not going to change this team around drastically, and they're still going to be a little boring, in my opinion. Sorry, Islanders fans.
Matt, on the other hand, here you gave him a B minus. So I know that you really like the Romanov edition. Tell us why.
Yeah, I really like Romanov. I think he's a emerging young defenseman in this league. I think he's somebody who you didn't get to see much of him there in Montreal because Montreal sucked last year. So you never really got to saw how good he was. But he's a good young player. He's only like 23, 24 years old. So got plenty of hockey ahead of him. And he's going to be a guy that's going to be leading this top defensive core. And whenever you can get rid of two 40-year-old defensemen and bring in a 23-year-old, that's always a dub for me. As long as you're getting younger, which is something they really need to do. If you look at this roster, not only is it like a weird defensive scheme style roster, and like Jake said, it's kind of hampering Barcel's development there. It's also a team that's really old. I mean, there's a lot of dudes on long-term deals. That's something they tried to do, is get rid of Everly, which is what they did in the expansion draft in Seattle. But they still have a lot of old guys on this roster and need to get turned over. And it's definitely a transition period for them. But I do think this is a good start. When you bring in a guy like Romanoff, he's kind of a guy who's going to be coming in. He's going to be kind of the new addition to this defense. I wouldn't be shocked if they start shipping off pieces at the deadline and they just start like rebuilding this team slowly but surely. We'll see if Barca wants to save for that. But I think it's something that I wouldn't be shocked at all if they do. But I give it a B- because I just think the Romanoff signing I really like, and I think he's the guy who could lead their future defensive core.
Yeah, I think they're going to run into another sort of Tavares situation with Bartzel, where the player just kind of wants out now that they made those couple runs. They made it to a few conference finals, and they couldn't get it done. I think they got stopped by Tampa. I misspoke with stomped because I think they were both game 7s to Tampa. So they were that close twice. But the team's, as far as I'm concerned, no longer that deep of a contender. And so just like Tavares, who just wanted to go somewhere where he could win, which is ironic because he went to Toronto, Bartzel may also want out, but at least Tavares got the captaincy, right? Bartzel's sitting here as a nobody on a team that's sinking.
Yeah, and honestly, Matt, I love Romanov as well. I definitely agree. He's a great guy to bring in. I did like that move. So the reason I gave him an F here is because I just think the team isn't doing enough. We saw the collapse last season, and some may blame it to injuries, but quite frankly, even when everyone was healthy, they weren't playing that great. So I don't think that they did enough to get better. But I think in the long-term future, Romanov's going to be a great defender for them. Absolutely. So with that, let's talk about the next team in New York here over in the Madison Square Garden. That'd be the Rangers. So they added Domingue, Halak, and Trocheck, most notably, but they also lost a decent amount of players as well in Kopp, Braun, Petrano, Strome. So a lot of moves here this offseason. I gave him a B-, Jake C+, Matt C. So we're all pretty much in the same ballpark here. Jake, what were your thoughts on New York?
So I am a firm believer that you build a team from the center out. So the only other real option, in my opinion, is goaltender, but they've got that on lock. The other thing is center position, and they lost their top 3 centers. I don't think that makes sense. They did bring in Trocheck, but he's going to have to relearn the system. He's going to have to hopefully build chemistry with the guys he's playing with. I don't think it made sense to lose the guys that they did, especially the quantity that they did. But I do like the Trocheck addition, so that's why they end up a little better than average.
Yeah, Matt, how about you?
Yeah, it just seemed like I agree with him. It just seemed they lost a little bit too much. That I mean, when you're bringing in a guy like Trocheck, that's always great, and that's going to be something that's going to be an addition. But then you get rid of a guy like Kopp, who had a career year for you, who I thought it'd be somebody they'd look to bring back, but it looked like they were going to go another way for some reason. And then you lose a guy like Strome, who was a really good contributing center there for the last couple of years, and he's been a good second or third line center. So like, it's kind of like, yeah, they got a little bit. I don't know if they got better. They kind of just stayed the same, and they got a little bit worse with that, where it was just like you're adding one center to drop 2 more very good ones, and then it's just all the other depth guys that they lost. They're kind of gutting the bottom of the roster, and that's because they're paying so much money to their top guys now. Like, it's insane how much money they're giving to guys like Truba, guys like Panarin, and stuff like that. So like, yeah, it's a little bit of trying times for them. They're kind of getting desperate, and they see the season that Trocheck has, and they're going to try to bring him in and see what they can do. Maybe give a little bit more offensively than a guy like Kopp did. But honestly, I think they should have probably just tried bringing back Kopp and run it back again because they had a really good year.
Yeah. And yeah, the only reason that they were over a C for me is because I really liked the Trocheck signing because of the fact they lost that center depth. And I think what Carolina's loss is definitely New York's gain. He's a great player on both sides of the ice, defensively and offensively, in my opinion. I think he's going to be really good for them. All right, so next up we have the Philadelphia Flyers, fellas, who added Braun and D'Angelo, and they lost Yandel, Lindblom, and Jones. All across the board, we got C's here, fellas. So let's break it down a little bit. How come we all think it's a little bit of an average offseason?
So I don't understand the Flyers. It seems like every year they bring in a couple well-known defenders, but their offense is lacking Now they got rid of Voracek. They got rid of Giroux. They do have Atkinson still. But they just brought in Braun and D'Angelo, which I like D'Angelo. I think Braun is a very capable defender as well. But as far as the team makeup right now, it doesn't make sense. You cannot compete without an offense, and they're trying to compete entirely from their back end. Plus, the Lindblom buyout is atrocious. You marketed the heck out of that guy. You used and abused his illness, and then you buy out his contract. It's one thing if you lose him to free agency, but buying out his contract, what, a year after you just marketed his condition and his battle for your own gain? I think that that's just a toxic thing from the franchise, but we shouldn't be surprised since this is the same team that ended Yandel's Ironman streak with like 10 games to go. So, you know what, Flyers? I don't like you.
Matt, let's break it down a little bit from your perspective as well. Do you like the D'Angelo signing here?
Yeah, I thought the D'Angelo signing is what kind of saved them, and I think it would have been a worse offseason for me, but they did end up getting rid of Martin Jones, and as you did not know, he's what's the word? Terrible. He's very bad in net. So a guy like that, getting him out the door is a plus no matter what it is. Bumps up their grade immediately. But yeah, I agree with Jake. The Oscar Lindblom situation is it's really just disgraceful to me. I think if you're going to use his condition and you're going to keep this guy on the roster and you're going to market him as being a future franchise forward and then you buy him out immediately, it's like, I hope he goes on a team somewhere else and just scores 7 goals against them next year. That would be hilarious. But then yeah, the Keith Yandle situation, and then just their GM just seems terrible. He just keeps making more and more worse moves. I know we saw a thing earlier about a week ago where had him ranked as the worst GM, and I kind of seem to agree because some of the moves that they seems like every single year they get worse and worse and worse, and this year is another year where that seems to happen, and their scheme just doesn't make sense. Their forwards are very lacking or old, and I don't know. It just seems like a team that's just going to continually be the bottom here in the Metro.
Mm-hmm. All right, fellas. Well, let's flip to a team that can potentially make the playoffs here, even with their old core, and that's the Pittsburgh Penguins. They added Ruda and Kajula, most notably, and they lost Boyle, Rodriguez, and Domingue. But I gave them a B minus for it. Jake, you gave them a B plus. You seem to really like what they've done, and Matt, you gave them a D plus. So it's interesting. Let's see why one of us loves it and why one of us doesn't like what they did this offseason. Jake, we'll start with you first.
So most of my grade revolves around that lost list. They did not lose that many guys, and the guys that they did lose, they replaced. Like you have Jan Ruda on defense who's coming in, and I think that is a great addition. He played on Tampa's penalty kill. They're not a team that heavily relies on their defense. They use their offense because you have gifted players like Sidney Crosby. There is one important lesson that I think all NHL players learned this offseason, and they learned it from Pittsburgh Penguin forward Evgeny Malkin. If you cry enough and you make it publicized that your team is betraying you and how this is the worst experience of your life, they will eventually overpay you. And so that's why Pittsburgh lost several guys. It's because Evgeny Malkin threw the biggest fit in the history of the NHL, and he got a contract. And I like Evgeny Malkin, but come on, man.
Matt, now let's come over to you. Does your grade reflect on some of the signings and the lengths of contracts that were given to some of these older guys, or is it solely because of who they gained and who they lost?
I think it's a combination of both. I think the Malkin signing, I agree with Jake, it's an overpay, and more so just the fact that 4 years is just nuts for a guy at his age. And at $6 million, yeah, he's a really good player. He's going to give you good development, but it just didn't make sense. And that led the door to a guy like Evan Rodriguez, who was having a resurgence there in Pittsburgh. Losing him, I thought was a big thing. I mean, he was a guy who was really having a good season for him last year. I thought he'd be kind of a future there. He's only 26, 27 years old. And especially with guys like Malkin nearing the end of their career, they needed centers to take over the position there. And so they lose a guy like that. That's huge. He was also a good faceoff guy. That was the real big one. And the Jan Ruda signing was okay for me. He was also a guy who we saw in the playoffs actually got scratched. So that pretty much showed what you needed to know there in Tampa. So it was kind of weird that they were able to give him a multi-year contract worth almost $3 million a year. Is kind of crazy. But yeah, I'm sure he'll be a guy that gives them a good second or third pair of minutes. But I mean, for the most part, it just kind of seemed like they got way too older. For a team that was already old, they somehow found a way to get even older. And yeah, we'll see what this core can do for one more season.
I think you're coming at Jan Ruda pretty hard for a guy that's a fan of PK Subban. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I gave him a B minus here because I think that they slightly got better, and that's because of bringing Ruda in defensively. I think he's a good defensive defenseman that can help on a PK. Yeah, he struggled in the playoffs a little bit with Tampa, but he had some good seasons with Tampa. So I think that he can bring a little bit more to the back end there in Pittsburgh, and the core's just going to do what the core's been doing for years, and that's get him into the playoffs. And I don't think it's going to be any different this season. So next, fellas, we have the Washington Capitals. And they have gotten C's from us all across the board here. So we thought that they had a pretty average offseason, didn't really get better, didn't really get worse. Jake, you gave them a C. So let's start with you here. What did you like about the Caps?
Okay, so first I'll start with things that I didn't like, which is you lost Kempny and Schultz, which are two very capable defenders. I liked them in the Caps system. I think that they were a good fit for the team. They just got rid of them for nothing. That makes no sense to me. They got rid of all three of their top goaltending guys. So their starter, their backup, and their AHL starter. So why? I don't understand. I get it. Vanecek, sure, you wanted to go with Samsonov all playoffs, but not even. I think Samsonov was an RFA, and they just didn't qualify him. I don't understand the direction they were going there. And then they get Kemper, who is terrible. I will struggle to watch the Capitals this season because they refuse to get an actual starting goalie. And this team is so good. They're going to waste the last few years of Ovechkin and Oshie's career, and I think Backstrom's already done. They're wasting it by not having a goalie. It's all you need. They're going to be in like an Edmonton situation where they just can't get it done because they can't keep the puck out of the net.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Matt, what are your thoughts here? You have a similar grade. What do you think of bringing in Kemper and bringing in a guy like Dylan Strome to make up for some of the assets they lost?
Yeah, I think a guy like Dylan Strome would be weird to see how he fits with this team. I thought he was a very shoot-first guy in Chicago. Yeah, he could pass the puck a little bit, but he was a guy who definitely wanted to shoot. So it's going to be weird. I doubt they're going to play him with a guy like Ovechkin. He's probably going to play on the second line, probably going to be looking to play alongside some of their more pass-first wingers. And we'll see how that works out, see what he does outside of that Kane line that he used to be so successful with. But yeah, I think the big problem for me in what I agree with Jake is that I think they fell in love with the postseason that Darcy Kemper had, which wasn't even really that good. It was just kind of like he was just doing okay or enough to help them win the Stanley Cup there in Colorado. And they were like, you know what? That guy's one postseason is warranted of being our starting goaltender for the next 5 years, which I think is kind of crazy. And for a team, I think they kind of saw that they were so close to knocking off Florida last year, the President's Trophy winner, who did eventually get destroyed by Tampa. And they were like, "Oh man, if we just had just a little bit better goaltending, we could get over the hump." They see a guy like Kemper, a guy who won the Stanley Cup, and they're like, "You know what? This guy's going to get us over the hump." And maybe he will. Who knows? But I think I just don't see it. I think he's a guy that was kind of like a one-trick pony. He looked a little weird there in LA. Was never really the starter there in LA. Played decent in Arizona, and then he gets over to Colorado, wins the starting job, and he was good at times. I don't think he was ever elite, as much as many people try to say he is. But yeah, it's going to be kind of. I gave him a C because it's kind of like, yeah, they did replace what they needed to replace to get somebody there in net, but like, I don't think it was anything to push them over the hump.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree here. Um, Looking at the list of who they lost and who they brought in, I don't think they really made any spectacular moves. I don't think they made any moves that are going to really, really hurt them down the road. Kemper's contract is going to be the biggest thing to look for here. But other than that, it'll be interesting to see how these pieces come in and replace who they lost.
Plus, you have to keep in mind that you might as well add Backstrom to that lost list because he might have had a career-ending injury.
Yeah, yeah, that's absolutely true. Maybe that's why they brought in Dylan Strome potentially. Could be. But on that note, fellas, is there anything else that we missed or any comments that you guys wanted to add before we wrap up the video?
I do have one question for you guys, and these are two guys that we have mentioned in this video. I want you to tell me who you think is better between the Blue Jackets' newest addition, Johnny Gaudreau, and their arguably best player they've had until Gaudreau came in, and that's Artemi Panarin. Which guy do you think is better for the Blue Jackets?
For the Blue Jackets specifically?
Yeah, I think it makes sense for this scenario.
Okay. Matt, I got to think on this one. Do you have any answers?
Johnny Hockey because he's American for me.
Solid. I think I'm going to go with Panarin in this case, just because we saw what he had and how he fit with the team. And he was really good with Columbus towards the end of his, tenure there. He obviously made it clear that he didn't want to return, and all that was a little bit questionable of how it was handled. But, I mean, his play was really good. So it'll be interesting to see. I think Johnny Hockey's going to have no problem fitting in there. But I'm going to go with Panarin for now until we see what Gaudreau can do next season.
Yeah, I'm going to have to break the tie here and go with Gaudreau just because I'm riding the hype train. I have no idea how it's going to turn out, but I'm excited for it.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Hey, if you guys are still there with us, let us know in the comments below what you think of our grades and, who do you think got the biggest steal in free agency? And we'll see you next time on Wintermac Hockey. White jersey. Oh, now you start recording.
Why is he shirtless?